Take it away, Joe.
All right, Joe Trimboli, Huntington District. Glad to be here to share this with you. So what I want to try to share is a story of how we use GIS basically in our planning branch, and how recently some changes in how ACES supports Microsoft Access affected that. And so starting off with some questions even I had to answer. Have you ever wanted to know your project status? It's a big one in project management. Did you use Microsoft Access to do that? Because we lost support through ACES. So what I did was, because this occurred, I had to try to find a solution for how to replace the analytical capabilities that Microsoft Access provided. And currently, the solution I've selected and have been using is called Power Query. Now, Power Query is actually, I came across it when I was looking for a replacement for Access, and it was really hard to find. Access was kind of like had a graphical interface for SQL, which is a program language, and it did a lot of things that were kind of no code type of implementation of SQL. And I was looking for that and had a hard time finding it. But what ended up popping up for me is the Power BI capability in Microsoft Access. And the neat thing about it was free. I found it at the house and downloaded it, and I thought, this looks pretty powerful. It looks pretty nice. So I've started using it. And the other thing that's, let's go back. It's also integrated into a lot of the Office products. The term Power is multiple, basically, web-based applications that Microsoft is developing, across their platform, and it's actually in Excel too. And that's how I've been using it. So what we had to do was transition from Access to Power Query, but we had a lot of development in Microsoft Access, and I was basically an implementer in the non-structural program. So a lot of the management we did in Microsoft Access was based on our non-structural program. And so there's a whole history there. And we had a database that we created. It was actually created as like a proof of concept of how databases could be implemented into our program. But what ended up happening along the way is, it never transitioned to anything. We just used it. And it's kind of reminded me like we're talking about the version of Arc Pro Desktop. One day it's going to go away, right? Because we know that. And I knew this was going to go away too, but you have to prepare for it. You have to generally get funding and make a plan. Yeah, we don't do that. But when we started doing this, it was kind of an easy solution because it was available on the desktop. All our offices were basically using spreadsheets, so we already had pretty much acceptable fields that we could use to track and input information if we transitioned them to Access. So it became a pretty big staple in our office. And one of the things that was a big activity in that development was milestones, because this was back when we started looking at processes and business lines and how we could improve them. So that development, it was pretty extensive. I had a group of implementers in non-structural that I worked with, and basically directly because I was in the same section with them. And so the milestones end up being pretty critical to a lot of the automation too. Like this example here, it shows a whole selection of basically next steps that the implementer could select to to manage his time and her time today, you know, for, oh yeah, we need to go do a field trip. So, you know, basically they would select like the next step, next milestone. And it was pretty much automated through the back end. And there's an example of like a filter table there. So there was just a lot you could do in Access. It was, I thought it was pretty far reaching for its time because it included not only a database, but it had queries and forms and reporting capabilities. So it's a great product. But then we used it for more too. I mean, a lot of things we developed for the database was to check data, to see if it was clean data, to see who was using it. So we also built in data check queries and functions into it. So that's what this shows down at the bottom, some of the code. But then all the non-structural funding dried up and I was looking for work. So I ended up volunteering to go to Afghanistan and went over there as a community planner. It was a great experience. Interesting enough, at the time, they were using Microsoft Access too, in pretty portable ways. They were collecting data with it, you know, amongst the different commands in the organization. So that was kind of interesting. And then when I got back, I also volunteered for the GIS cadre, which turned out there was some application there with some experience I had in the California wildfires, which was kind of interesting because it's like, oh yeah, this is just like we did it under our non-structural program. It was parcels, kind of like real estate too. So when I went to one of the deployments, it was in Yuba City, California. You know, I was handed basically an email that said, here's the products we want, which I thought was great because it's great for people to know what they want. And it's great to know how to be able to support it. So I started basically programming this same concept into the map production in that deployment. And it was pretty interesting too, because that highlight there showed that, you know, there was different milestones based on different agencies too. So that was pretty unique to me. So these were the types of maps we produced, and we automated them in ArcMap. Saved a lot of time. So here's how that was summarized. I mean, there was a lot of parcels, but the update ended up being about 15 minutes. I was working for the state of California, actually, in a state office, placed there by the Corps and FEMA. And so some of the things we had to try to overcome was like, wow, we don't have a plotter. You know, we just have like a 11 by 17 maps, you know, so we designed it for what we had, but it still worked out pretty great. I couldn't imagine doing it, not being automated, but, and it was pretty big shock to not have Microsoft Access to do that. So one of my goals was to figure out how to replace it. And this is kind of the overall of how that occurred. I mean, the way I used it, and even in Microsoft Access, was just linking, you know, parcel IDs. It's pretty common in, you know, our map products to link tables and join them and things. So that's how it was used. But then I started having to, like I said, find a replacement, and I did find it in Power BI. Because in Power BI, there's Power Query. So the process I went through was I selected a number of activities that I wanted to place, you know, the methods that I was used in Access. I didn't want disruption, you know, I wanted to keep on being productive and doing what I do. So this is what I found, and I'm still learning it, by the way. But I haven't found anything I haven't been able to do in Microsoft Access, except, I mean, it's not Access, so most of what's happening in Power Query is the analytical part. It still links pretty well to the Azure products like we have in the past, if your computer's set up properly. So this was a test I set up to look at the milestone capability. And it's pretty interesting too, because I've never really seen this done on a large scale, the idea of automating reporting. But we have done it in the past. And basically this is how I've done it, not only in the past in SQL, we've done it in a large database environment too, out in Sacramento. And it's done pretty well in Power BI or Power Query too. So I set up this test, and this is based on the test. I've since gone on to look at bigger data sets and things, but this was a pretty small data set. I just wanted to test to see if it could be done. And these are the tables I set up. So the blue is the input tables, and then the green is the tables that have been created in Power BI. I was wanting to do a live demo, but I was afraid to. So, but I did find out some neat stuff I'll share with you at the end. I'm not sure how easy this is to see, but this is basically pulling in the Excel table into Power BI, not Power BI, but the Power Query. It has a large capability of connecting to a lot of different data sources, especially over the internet. And so these, compared to like Microsoft Access, we would have to download data and then connect to it. This does it live. It's really nice because, you know, when you go in, you can update and refresh your data just like a typical spreadsheet, and it's pulling it down, or it can pull it down off the internet or whatever data source or wherever it's at. So that is a big change and a big plus. And over on the right there where it shows the arrow, basically instead of queries and things, it goes through a process of like documenting your steps. And it shows them over there as applied steps, and those are like little pieces of code that get applied to the data. And it's really pretty easy. I mean, if you worked with Microsoft Access or Excel, or even in GIS as far as attribute tables, it's pretty easy to pick up. At least that's what I found. And it's very much like a super spreadsheet because it still has all the filtering in it. Excuse me. In this example, what I'm doing is going through this date table, the table that has the dates in it, and I'm changing all of those values to numbers. And the whole experience was to change it from dates or whatever's in the field, because a lot of times it's not consistent. It might be somebody typed in some information like a word instead of a date. So you can go through there and clean it up and look at it very quickly. I'm actually really surprised with the power and capability of it. Over here on the left, where there has those are pull down menus. So you have a whole selection there of data types that you can switch back and forth from. So that's really what this whole process was in this test, was to change from dates in fields that had null values, and some fields had zeros in them and some had words in them. But the whole process was to go through that and do the applied steps to change them to zeros and ones. And, you know, it's done by filtering. This is an example of replacing values. And this was replacing null values. So it's replacing all the null values with zero. Changing data types and flipping all the zeros to true and false now. And and then switching them back to integers. So ended up with zeros and ones. And in Microsoft Access using SQL, it wasn't that quick, I'm telling you. Because all I'm doing here is basically picking commands that are, in an interactive interface. It's very no code type interface. And but the code is on the other side there where it says applied steps. There's the little gears there let you go back and edit the functions that you did do. You can delete them and redo them. A lot of functionality. I'm excited about it. So anyway, changing from dates and different data types. One of the interesting things in the process, it's not on here, but I did it on some of the data that I had out in California. So it had dates in some cases and then in some cases people put like words in there. So I had to decide, well, do I want that to be null, or do I want to accept it as some kind of action that was supposed to be a date? But you can do that. So then in the end, there's like, oh no, I got to do some code. Well, it's not even that hard. They give you a lot of walkthrough, a lot of capabilities to a lot of these types of windows that walk you through some of the code processes. That's actually the formula on the bottom. All the milestones, I had a separate date and description in a table. So all I'm doing here is pulling all those ones and zeros together into what I would call a classification. So it's just a text string. And then the neat thing about it is there's links to where it says learn about, I can't read it on my computer, learn about Power Query formulas. Well, they have a whole documented website on that. And couldn't find out they developed a whole new formula or a whole new programming language for this, Microsoft effort. I mean, because it's all linked together under this concept of Power Apps. And so they developed a new Power Query formula, or Power Query M. The M, by the way, stands for mashup, because it basically can bring in a lot of different sources. SharePoint, and I'll show it to you here in a minute, but I queried REST services from Esri and different things like that. So you can pull all types of different tabular type data into this. And the Power BI actually links with Esri products. It has an ArcMap plugin for it. And they've also developed some plugins for the Microsoft desktop applications. And they're still developing it too. So it's going to change. So this shows basically the table of the milestone definitions. This is a screenshot of it. I would do merges in Access, but it wasn't this way. It was more of a manual process. You had to know how to write the queries. But here, this is what it would look like in Power Query. So here you're linking two tables. You're selecting table 1, table 2, and then graphically selecting the link to them. In this case, on the table 1 is the position, what I call position because you're looking for basically the last built-in action, which in this case is represented by either a 0 or 1. And you're typically executing a milestone from left to right, but to get the last one, you're looking at it from right to left. And then I'm linking it to the description table. And this is the merge query on top. It just creates fields that shows that relationship after it was merged. But then the whole thing is code. I mean, you can pull up the code and see it manually, and that's what I wanted to show here. I mean, those are a lot of steps, but this is what you end up with is just a little bit of code. It's actually a real estate example. So one of the things I thought interesting too was they have a last action column on their SharePoint site. I'm not sure if it's automated, but I thought, yeah, man, it needs to be automated. Because that's the exact same thing I wanted to do, you know, in an automated process. So one of my first tests was with FEMA. So when I pulled these milestones and best results together, I included that on there because working in planning, we look at the disaster declarations quite a bit, and they change sometimes quite often. So it's neat having that live connection. You know, it just I can't tell you how many file types it reads and how easy it is. SharePoint sites, you know, as long as you have access to them, and you know, if you have access to it, just by clicking on it, usually you should be able to pull it in to the Power Query too. The Power BI is available in Teams, and it looks like it's being used extensively throughout the Corps. I looked into getting a license in our district. It didn't go very well. But after a while of using it, I didn't think it was needed. I mean, you definitely don't need it to do what I'm doing here. a lot of the license takes care of creating like the HTML type web pages, you know, with all the graphics, kind of like what we do in 3 minutes. We better get going now. So one of my results here was looking at the FEMA declarations, because it was pretty nice. They have a lot of different fields in there that you can isolate and look at in different ways too. This one is looking at flood data. What I noticed is there might be a declaration for maybe tornadoes or even severe storms, but there's a data field in there that lists basically a lot more detailed event occurrences that you can isolate, such as flooding, because flooding occurs in hurricanes and storms and tornadoes, and you can isolate that more. And that's what this is depicting. So before I go to, I got 3 minutes, I was told. I want to try to show you what I did last night. See if this is it. But I use a lot of the economic data, and we have a lot of economists in our section. Kurt Buchanan told me the other day, he said, oh, our structured data inventory is out there. So I immediately started playing with it. So this is the structured data inventory data being pulled into Power Query from the service that they have out there. They have an API, and it pretty much come right in. A lot of button pushing, you know, and hitting OK, but there it is. And this is being published in a GIS format, but basically in the process, it kind of just strips that part out and uses the attribute table. So they have a lot of neat data there. I get excited about working with the data. So, you know, immediately they have like what zone A or AE the structure is in. So now I want to do the whole state. I was talking to the guys that produced it. I said, you have to download the state data. I don't want to download it. I want to stream it. But that's all I have. Any questions? Yeah.
Not really a question, but I just want to add on, because I'm glad you brought it up, because I've had a lot of success with Power Query. And then I don't know if you know, but through Power BI and go all these different channels, if you're interested, you can loop around to me, but you can actually connect directly to EDW, which has CFOMS, P2, pretty much all tons of databases and sports. Yeah. So I made a couple of things through there, but even just if you're just a GIS user, I've had a lot of success just using Power Query to get data that wasn't super easy.
Okay, I want to talk to you.
Scrape some web pages, get some data that maybe I probably should pay for, but
as a planner, I would consider what I do as being a data consumer. Yeah. And you know, it's from all of you. I mean, yeah. You know, I need to know where the data is.
It's definitely not a tool to overlook. You know, definitely, you know, GIS people sometimes they have to be crafty, and it's definitely probably one of the best tools to get a little crafty sometimes. So,
and it's easy, right?
Worth looking. So glad you brought it up in that presentation.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when Access went belly up, did you consider potentially migrating to Oracle? It has some of those same capabilities.
Yeah, but you know, we're a small planning shop. It's not a big budget, so it's usually, you know, what you can get.
On the licensing side.
I do have another database that we're transitioning, and we got pretty lucky because we had a local contractor who's a programmer. So he's migrating one of my Access databases to basically, you know, an Oracle server with a web-based front end. So, but yeah, everything's more distributed now. I haven't figured out forms, but I guess that's why we have the programmers.
Let me ask another question. Data that you're working with there, does that relate to anything in P2?
No, none of that data came from P2. But I used to be able to connect to, you know, like she was saying, to a lot more of our databases, you know, I guess in a more casual way. But, you know, you have to get your permissions now usually to do a lot of that stuff. But I've always basically, used the Microsoft Access as an analytical tool, and it's great to see that I haven't lost that, so.
I'm also glad to hear all the power tools, because I've been using Power Apps, Power BI, Power Automate, and I was also a lot of Access databases before, so I totally get where you're going from it. And are you using the Power BI reporting tools with this?
No, I'm not, no. But I know a lot of people, I'm in planning, so we've been seeing a lot of planning tools coming out of headquarters where they're developing in Power BI.
Okay. Well, I was wondering if you had, because you mentioned the plugin that they have for Esri, which I think got blocked, like they took it out. But I was curious if you knew anything about that plugin with Esri.
I tried it and I put it on my computer and tried it with a process in PowerPoint, because it was also, they have some tools for PowerPoint. Wasn't too impressed with it, but I also seen where there's some new development on those tools. I mean, just like last week where they came out, you know, it looks like it's going to be something that continues the development. So hopefully it will continue and there'll be more interactive capabilities there.
Okay, let's do a round of applause.